The alarms did not sound. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. When the sensors picked up 11,000 ships dropping out of warp above our moon, every screen in the command center should have turned red. Instead, they turned quiet, calm, like the system already knew what was coming and had made peace with it long before I had. My name is Daniel Ashworth, and I was standing in the underground command post outside Denver when the largest fleet ever assembled in recorded history arrived to end us. 3 months earlier, the Galactic Council held a vote. 612 delegates representing 400 worlds decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist as a free species, not because we had attacked anyone, not because we had broken a single treaty. We were voted against because we refused to hand over our weapons research, our ships, and our right to grow. The final tally was 491 in favor of invasion. Only a handful of smaller species voted against it, too afraid of the consequences of standing beside us to abstain, let alone object. I watched the broadcast of that vote from a bunker 3 kilometers under the Rocky Mountains. My commanding officer, a quiet woman named Karen Whitfield, turned off the screen the moment the final number appeared. She looked at every officer in that room and said one sentence: "Let them come." We had known this day was coming for 11 years. Ever since the first alien signal reached Earth, our scientists and generals had studied every scrap of Council history, every war between member species, every pattern of behavior a rigid bureaucratic alliance repeats without realizing it. We learned that the Council never fought wars quickly. They fought them by committee, by vote, by endless deliberation, and when they finally acted, they acted with overwhelming numbers because none of their commanders trusted each other enough to act with anything less. That single flaw became our entire strategy. The fleet above us was commanded by a being named Voran Kale, a decorated strategist from a species called the Threll. Tall, pale-skinned, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern across his face. He had crushed 3 rebellions among his own people and had been handed command of this invasion because the Council believed no one else could guarantee a swift victory. Voran expected total surrender within 6 hours. His scouts reported no orbital defense platforms, no visible starships, no organized military presence anywhere near our major cities. To him, it looked like a civilization that had already given up. He had no idea that every visible defense had been removed on purpose. The first wave of landing craft entered our atmosphere at dawn. I remember the sound of dropships tearing through cloud cover, thousands of engines screaming as they descended toward Denver, London, Tokyo, and 40 other cities across the planet. Civilians had already been moved into deep shelters weeks earlier, evacuated quietly under the cover story of a global infrastructure drill. The world above ground looked abandoned, but it was empty by design. Voran's soldiers landed expecting resistance and found nothing but open streets and silent buildings. His communications officer reported the situation as, in her words, unnervingly peaceful. That peace lasted for exactly 11 minutes. At the 11-minute mark, every landing zone across the planet triggered the same signal. Not a bomb, not a missile, but an electromagnetic pulse woven into a frequency that the Council fleet's own outdated shielding could not filter. We had learned that frequency from a captured relay drone 2 years earlier, one that had been sent to monitor us and mistakenly transmitted its full technical specifications back through an intercepted channel. Every piece of Council electronics within range went dark, not destroyed, just blind, deaf, and disoriented for exactly 90 seconds. 90 seconds was all we needed. Ground teams that had been hidden in maintenance tunnels, subway systems, and reinforced basements moved out the instant the enemy's sensors failed. These were not massive armies. They were small, highly trained units, some no larger than 6 people, each one carrying equipment built specifically to disable dropships without a single explosion, cables that fused control systems, devices that scrambled navigation computers, tools built by engineers who had spent a decade studying exactly how Council technology worked, and exactly how to make it stop working. By the time Voran's sensors came back online, 40% of his landing craft across the globe were stranded, unable to lift off, and unable to call for support. I was leading one of those ground teams in Denver. My unit consisted of 5 people. Priya Malhotra, our systems specialist, had memorized every schematic of Council dropship architecture we had gathered from years of intercepted signals. Marcus Webb handled communications and jamming equipment. Fiona Doyle carried medical supplies and backup power cells. A young engineer named Ola Bankole moved faster than anyone I had ever seen, climbing gantries and hull plating like it was nothing. And then there was me, coordinating our movements and keeping us alive. We reached our assigned dropship exactly as the 90-second blackout ended. Priya was already halfway up the hull, attaching a small device to an access panel most soldiers would never notice unless they had studied the ship for years. The device did not explode. It rerouted power directly into the ship's own defensive systems, forcing them to overload from the inside. The ship groaned, lights flickering along its hull, and then it simply stopped. No fire, no smoke, just silence, and 40 soldiers trapped inside a machine that would not open its doors. We did the same thing 4 more times that morning. By midday, Voran realized something was deeply wrong. His fleet had assumed a swift victory. Instead, nearly half of his ground forces were stranded, unable to communicate, and completely cut off from resupply. Worse, his scanners still showed no organized military response, no counterattack, nothing that should be capable of causing this level of disruption. He ordered a full withdrawal of grounded troops and a shift to orbital bombardment instead, planning to simply flatten our cities from space, rather than risk more soldiers. This was exactly what we had hoped he would do. Humanity's true defense had never been on the ground. It had been 300 kilometers above it, hidden inside what the Council's scans identified as harmless communication satellites. These satellites were nothing of the sort. They were the culmination of everything Earth had built in secret for over a decade, disguised using stealth technology, reverse-engineered from a damaged scout ship that had crashed in the Pacific years earlier. The moment Voran's fleet reoriented for bombardment, those satellites activated. They were not weapons in the traditional sense. Each one carried a compact device designed to project a targeted distortion field, something our scientists nicknamed a graviton lattice, capable of bending the trajectory of incoming fire back toward its source. It could not stop a direct hit from a massive warship, but it did not need to. It only needed to disrupt aim just enough to turn a devastating strike into a wasted shot. Voran's flagship opened fire on London. The shot bent, curving unnaturally through the atmosphere, and struck one of his own support cruisers instead. Confusion spread through the fleet immediately. Commanders began accusing each other of sabotage. Communications between ships, already strained by years of political rivalry among Council member species, broke down entirely. Some ships stopped firing altogether, unsure if their own allies were now working against them. I watched all of this from a secondary command terminal deep underground, watching data streams update in real time. Karen Whitfield stood beside me, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "They still outnumber us 100 to 1, she said quietly. "Numbers don't win wars," I told her. "Confusion does." She almost smiled at that. By the end of the first day, Voran had lost communication with nearly a third of his fleet. Ships that should have been coordinating a devastating bombardment were instead firing on empty ocean, striking each other by accident, or sitting motionless as their crews tried to determine what was happening. Council doctrine had never prepared them for an enemy that refused to fight the way they expected. That night, Voran called an emergency council among his surviving commanders. I only know what was said because we intercepted the transmission through a relay we had planted inside a captured scout drone months earlier. One commander, a younger officer named Bressa Thal, argued for full retreat, insisting that continued engagement risked losing the entire fleet to an enemy whose capabilities they still did not understand. Voran refused. Retreating now, he argued, would embarrass the Council in front of every species watching this invasion unfold. Failure was not something his career, or his pride, could survive. He ordered a second wave of ground troops, this time targeting our deep shelters directly, believing that if he could capture our command centers, resistance would collapse entirely. This was the moment we had been waiting for. Every deep shelter marked on Council scans as a command center was in fact empty. True positions of leadership, coordination, and control had been distributed across hundreds of smaller, disguised locations years earlier, following the same principle that had guided our entire strategy from the beginning. Never give the enemy one target large enough to matter. When Voran's second wave landed, they found empty rooms, disabled terminals, and nothing else. No hostages, no leadership to capture, no victory to claim. While his forces searched empty shelters, our remaining ground teams moved through the tunnels beneath their landing zones, repeating the same tactic from the morning. Disable, don't destroy, strand, don't kill unless there was no other option. We had learned early that every ship left intact but useless was another obstacle in Voran's own path, another burden slowing his ability to coordinate. By the second day, nearly 60% of Voran's ground forces were stranded across the planet, unable to move, unable to communicate, and completely disconnected from any coordinated command structure. It was around this time that something happened that none of us had planned for. A group of soldiers from a species called the Yeth, small and reptilian, part of the invasion force but historically treated as lesser allies within the Council hierarchy, found themselves stranded near a town outside Manchester. Instead of continuing to fight, their commanding officer, A soldier named Ses Corin made contact with a local defense team and requested a ceasefire. Karen Whitfield authorized the meeting personally. I was not present for that conversation, but I read the transcript later. Ses Corin explained that his people had been forced into this invasion under threat of losing trade rights within the council, not because they believed Earth deserved to be conquered. He said his soldiers had no desire to die for a war they never chose. We offered him shelter and medical care instead of continued conflict. Word of that decision spread quickly among the other stranded council forces, particularly among smaller species who had joined the invasion out of obligation rather than conviction. By the third day, we were no longer only disabling ships. We were negotiating surrenders from entire units who no longer believed in the fight they had been sent to win. Voran Kale did not take this well. Reports from intercepted communications described him growing increasingly erratic, blaming his subordinates for failures that were, in truth, the result of a strategy he simply had never encountered before. He ordered increasingly aggressive bombardment attempts, ignoring the growing number of failed strikes and self-inflicted damage across his own fleet. It was during one of these bombardment attempts that his flagship made a critical mistake. Believing our satellite network had a limited operational range, Voran ordered a strike pattern designed to overwhelm the graviton lattice system entirely, firing from multiple angles simultaneously, in hopes that at least one shot would break through undisrupted. He was partially right. The system could be overwhelmed, but overwhelming it did not mean disabling it. It meant every deflected shot had nowhere reliable to go except back toward the densest concentration of firepower in the sky, which was his own fleet, clustered together in a formation built for coordinated assault rather than defensive spacing. The result was not an explosion of dramatic proportions. It was simply a cascading series of failures, ships losing power, drifting out of formation, colliding with debris from their own damaged vessels. Within 20 minutes, Voran's once organized armada had become a scattered, disorganized mess above our planet. I remember standing in the command center watching the data update in silence. No one cheered, no one celebrated. We had all seen too much over those 3 days to feel anything close to triumph. What we felt instead was a quiet, exhausted relief. Karen Whitfield turned to me and asked a simple question. Is it over? I did not know how to answer that yet. The following morning, Voran Kale requested direct communication with Earth's leadership. It was the first time since the invasion began that he had spoken to us as anything other than an enemy giving orders. I was present for that conversation, standing behind Karen as the transmission connected. Voran's 4 eyes carried something I had not expected to see. Not anger, exhaustion. He asked how a species with no visible fleet, no advanced weapons displayed on any scan, and no history of interstellar conflict had managed to dismantle an invasion force this large in 3 days. Karen's answer was simple. We did not need a fleet, she said. We needed time to understand exactly how you fight, and the patience to let you walk into a mistake you did not know you were making. Voran did not respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice carried something between disbelief and quiet respect. The Council will not accept this outcome easily, he said. Karen nodded, unaffected by the warning. Then they can vote again, she replied. Let's see how that turns out for them. The withdrawal took another 2 days to complete. Stranded units, unable to repair their ships without support, were given the choice to remain on Earth under negotiated terms or wait for evacuation transports sent by their own governments once news of the failed invasion reached Council space. Many of the smaller species, including the Yeth soldiers we had first made contact with, chose to stay, uninterested in returning to an alliance that had sent them to die for a war built on fear rather than necessity. News of the invasion's failure spread through Council space within a week. Species who had voted in favor of the invasion, confident in an easy victory, now faced the reality that the fleet they had approved was in ruins, and the world they intended to conquer remained fully intact, its true capabilities still largely unknown to the wider galaxy. Voran Kale was recalled to face judgment before the very council that had sent him. I do not know what became of him after that, though reports later suggested his career and his standing among his people never recovered. For us, the aftermath was quieter than anyone expected. There were no grand celebrations, no declarations of galactic dominance. Karen Whitfield addressed the surviving personnel with a message that I still remember clearly. We did not win this because we were stronger, she said. We won because we understood something they never bothered to learn about us. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender, and a species that refuses to be predictable can never truly be conquered by one that only knows how to follow orders. In the months that followed, several smaller council species reached out to Earth directly, seeking new agreements built on mutual respect rather than forced compliance. The larger, more aggressive members of the alliance grew quieter, no longer eager to propose action against a planet that had, without a single warship of its own, dismantled the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. I often think back to that morning in the command center, watching the alarms stay silent while 11,000 ships prepared to end everything we had built. I think about how close we came to losing everything, and how much of our survival depended not on brute strength, but on understanding our enemy better than they understood themselves. The galaxy voted to invade Earth, certain that numbers alone would decide the outcome. What they never accounted for was a species willing to wait, to plan, and to let overwhelming force defeat itself through its own arrogance. It was, without question, the last mistake they ever made.